Okay, I'm gonna hang up with you. Hi everyone. So we're gonna be live streaming this on Facebook too, and that's what I was doing. But I'm just gonna start the live screen when we open up to everyone. I see we have about 32 participants on, but we had over 200 registered. So if you guys are on, just hold tight. We'll start in a few minutes. And we're waiting on Vishnu as well, right?
That's correct.
Okay. I don't see him. Is Ashley there at all, Raphael?
Yes, she's on the background.
Okay, do you think maybe Ashley, would you mind reaching out to Vishnu and just make sure he can get on? Oh, hello.
Ashley just confirmed that she reached out to Vishnu.
I just spoke to Vishnu. He's having problems. He's on the phone with IT at his office trying to get him on.
Okay. Okay. Sorry, everyone. We're having a few technical issues with one of our panelists, but we will start shortly. Thanks for joining. I see that someone has their hand up. We're not going to be allowing the attendees to speak, but if you guys have any questions or comments, you can go ahead and type it into the Q&A, and we'll go ahead and go over how this panel is going to work shortly. But if you have any pressing questions, you can put it in the Q&A. Hi, Vishnu, can you hear us? Vishnu, can you hear us? Can anyone hear me?
I hear you.
Oh, okay, thank you. Thanks. Okay, maybe it's me.
I was tempted, but I go, no, she's asking for Vishnu.
Well, I see he's on. I think he's trying to connect
Yeah.
the audio. All right. Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Hi, Vishnu, can you hear us? Hey, Carolina, you're muted. Hold on.
I think it's better if you have me muted on the computer because I'm logged in through the phone.
Oh, okay. Got it.
So what I was trying to say earlier is that we are not TV producers. We're attorneys, management companies, and accounting firms. So sometimes these glitches happen as we are learning up this very steep curve that's been the last few months of navigating the technology to make sure that we can continue to communicate with our clients and our association members.
Okay, so Vishnu, can you hear us yet? Oh, you're muted. Hold on. So Vishnu, I think you're muted. You just have to oh, there you go.
Can you guys hear me yet?
Ah, yay.
Perfect.
Yes, okay. All right, so can you hear us? We can hear you.
Oh, minimize. Can we minimize this?
Minimize.
Here, hold on. Oh, so that's up.
Hmm?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Yeah.
Oh,
All
sorry.
right, so I think we're ready to rock and roll.
Okay, bye.
Okay, give me 1 second. We're going live on Facebook as well. Well, we were going to, and now I'm getting an error message. This is too much.
It is an interesting day.
Let's try that.
Technology is amazing when it works.
Yeah, and it's incredibly annoying when it doesn't.
Yeah.
Let's see. Select go live. I want to go live. Sorry, guys.
So why don't I do this? Let me start with the intro while Alessandra gets us going live so we get this party going. My name is Carolina Shear. Myself and Alessandra Stiebelman are partners at Eisinger Law. We focus our representation on community association law. We represent about 700 associations throughout the state of Florida. And as I briefly mentioned before, in navigating these new uncharted waters of COVID-19, we've taken our show, instead of taking our show on the road, we've taken it to the web, and we are now doing our webinars on a regular basis to reach out to our members in the community and be able to provide these educational seminars. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Raphael, who's with Affinity Management Services. Let you introduce yourself, and then we'll have Vishnu from Sharma and Associates as well. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope that you enjoy the presentation.
Thank you, Carolina. So my name is Rafael Aquino. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Affinity Management Services. We want to thank you all for being here today. I also want to thank Eisinger Law and Sharma for assisting and helping putting this together. We're big believers that knowledge is power. So we're proud to have the board of directors that are on this call, as well as the managers. We're hoping that today you'll be able to gain some additional knowledge when it comes to navigating through budgets and elections and the changes that have occurred. We are a full service management company. We service both Palm Beach, Broward, and Miami-Dade County. We are a medium-sized player is what we like to call ourselves. We manage approximately just shy of about 50 associations, close to about 7,800 units throughout the Tri-County area. With that said, Vishnu, maybe if you want to give a few remarks about yourself and your firm.
Sure, great. Thanks so much, Rafael. Thanks, Carolina and Alessandra. Great opportunity to be here. It's amazing how the world has changed in just 3 months, how many Zoom meetings and how everybody's adapted so well, so quickly to being able to do this. And it's a great opportunity for everybody to keep connected, even though we're still practicing that certain level of phase 1 or phase 2 social distancing. My firm is a CPA firm practicing in Southeast Florida. We primarily handle community association, condominium association, homeowners, and we do accounting both for self-managed and with management companies. We also do year-end audit review and compilations. We have a staff of about 21 employees here, and we handle about 16,000 units right now. I personally sit as chair of the Florida Institute of CPAs section on CIRA accounting, which governs condo and HOA. I also am on the board of trustees for CAI National out of DC, and then I'm also the president of CAI Southeast Florida, which is Dade, Broward, and Monroe counties. So look forward to participating today.
Thank you so much, Vishnu. So,
Rafael, we are now on live on Facebook as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Alessandra.
No problem.
Did you want to say a few words, Alessandra?
I just reiterating what you guys have said, education is really important for us. So thank you guys all for being here. It makes everyone's lives easier as professionals, as volunteers, when we're all on the same page and when our directors and managers and professionals understand the laws. So we're really big into bringing the education to everyone. I've been with the firm for over 10 years. I'm board certified in condominium and plan development law, and I'm really happy to be here. I think this is a great opportunity, and we're already getting some really great questions. So
excellent.
Let's get started.
Thank you so much, Alessandra. And for those individuals that haven't noticed, that we are going to be where we can, there's a Q&A and you can fill out your questions. We'll do our best to either answer them throughout the webinar, or if the participants or the panelists, I should say, have an opportunity, they'll answer it via text as well directly to you. So why don't we get started here with navigating budgets and the election changes. So let's start, I guess, with the dynamic duo with the two attorneys here from Eisinger. Where are we at the moment with the state of the emergency and the impacts that it's having with the Dbpr order with regards to emergency powers for associations?
So it's actually a bit of a controversial topic amongst attorneys because the association's emergency powers are granted under 718.1265 or their corresponding statutes for co-ops and HOAs. However, during the first few weeks of the pandemic, there was a large outreach to the Dbpr to provide us some guidance as to what we were able to do because the statutes appear to have been drafted more with a natural emergency, such as a hurricane, obviously in Florida, in mind. Correct. So with that said, the Dbpr issued an order which kind of picked and chose what emergency powers they felt were applicable. And that kind of struck up a debate amongst practitioners as to why or whether the Dbpr has the authority to basically trump the Florida statutes. That being said, about 2 weeks ago, Alessandra, correct me if I'm wrong, the Dbpr went ahead and said that the specified emergency powers that they further almost approved, for lack of a better word, were no longer needed. However, the issue is that the emergency powers or state of emergency is triggered by the governor's declaration of a state of emergency. So by virtue of the fact that the governor has extended the state of emergency, we are still under a state of emergency and may still utilize the emergency powers that are granted to the association. We've, at the onset, we've always explained that the emergency powers are not a free-for-all, and really they should be limited to doing what is reasonably necessary to make sure that you can operate and manage your association in the new norm. So really where we've seen the most impact and the assistance of the emergency order is the ability to hold our meetings under modified procedures, the ability, the widespread ability to have our meetings via Zoom. That has been vital into being able to operate associations during, and all of the associations that I've worked with have really transitioned spectacularly to doing their Zoom meetings. And we're finding that the meetings are much more streamlined. They're more effective. There's less disruption. So this is definitely here to stay.
Yeah, I would agree with you there, Carolina. I mean, to be honest, it's actually been even more effective to handle the board meetings because of the fact that, you know, the board can focus on the decisions that they have to make without all the interruptions and everything that's going on.
You mean
Further, it's been a huge advantage. I'm sorry?
I said the fantastic mute button.
Yeah.
Which is a lot harder to incorporate in person.
I mean, obviously, you always have to make sure you're a professional and answer all the questions, right? But ultimately, it's also allowed from a management perspective. It's allowed for the managers to really conduct meetings at lunchtime or even at 7 o'clock and not have to worry about driving to the property or staying at the property an extra time and then driving home. So there's been a lot of advantages. We're hoping that it's here to stay for a long time, if not forever. But we'll see what happens if any changes do occur.
Right.
So
and,
now that we're kind of, go ahead.
Just one more comment in answering one of the questions, because it's still a little bit unclear as to the enforceability of the Dbpr's orders, right? We're still under the state of emergency. The Dbpr, I think, attempted to clarify what the association's emergency powers were, and then they ended it. I think there was a lot of pressure from the real estate lobby and the realtors lobby to stop the emergency powers because some associations were taking it too far.
Correct.
But that doesn't mean that you can't still have these Zoom meetings. So when we have the only issue where this comes up, and Carolina, feel free to interject, but ultimately when board members are allowed by statute to appear telephonically or via video conference, which is what Zoom would be, and them attending like this counts for quorum purposes. The only issue that would be somewhat problematic would be a member's participation in a Zoom meeting for purposes of a membership meeting as opposed to a board meeting. So arguably, we take the position that right now it counts, but in order to be safe, you can always have the general proxies to ensure you have a complete quorum so that you can actually conduct the meeting via Zoom. But those are still, there's still procedural hurdles that I think will be considered in the next legislative amendments as to the use of Zoom for association matters.
No, I would agree 100% there. And actually, even with all this going on, a lot of board members, I think, have realized how easy it is, even though we had a little bit of a challenge getting on, but how easy it is to use these technologies. And we're seeing, where board members are more interested now in potentially using electronic voting. So I wanted to start there since we're on the election topic. So why don't we start with some of the basic steps, Alessandra, if you could give us some basic steps of what the association needs to do to prepare for an annual and election meeting. And if there's anything different that the board has to do in order to set it up for electronic voting.
Okay, so the approval of electronic voting is very simple. For condos, HOAs, and co-ops, the statute allows that the association can opt in to electronic voting, but the procedures to do so, it requires that the board take a vote at a board meeting. And there has to be a notice that's sent 14 days prior with a resolution. And the statute's very specific as to what needs to be included in the resolution, that the owners have to have the option to opt into electronic voting, opting out. So we have a very detailed package that we prepare for our clients, and they send it out with 14 days notice to the entire membership, either electronically if they already have written consents for electronic notice, or via regular mail if you don't have that. And at the board meeting, the board adopts this resolution, and then at any point in the future, they can utilize a third-party vendor or a management company or whoever else is providing these these service providers for electronic voting, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but they can retain electronic voting providers at any point, and they're not required to for every meeting. So if you're in an association where you foresee in the future, you want to have the ability to do electronic voting, but you're not sure you want to do it at your upcoming election, you may still want to go through the procedures to incorporate and to approve electronic voting moving forward, and then start looking into the details and who you're going to utilize.
Okay, excellent. And Ken, so you mentioned a bit about Zoom. So have any of your clients at the moment experience of doing an election via Zoom? I know we haven't had to do an election via Zoom. And how about for HOAs as well? Because obviously HOAs are a totally different animal when it comes to the election process.
I'll let Carolina take this one, because
Okay.
I know you've had some good experience with the elections on Zoom. Oh, you're muted.
Got it. Okay, so you guys can hear me now. I was kicked off from the phone. Okay, so the experience with Zoom elections for condominium associations has slightly evolved. From my very first one early on during the pandemic to my most recent one, they've gotten to be very, very streamlined and very simple. Initially, the way that we set it up is we have usually it'll be the manager, myself as the association's counsel, and we would solicit two. We have to try to keep our numbers low. So we would solicit 2 impartial counters to go ahead and participate in the election. In the last one that I did, what we did was we had 3 laptops going, in essence. There was one laptop that was kind of panning throughout the entire room. And then I had 2 laptops set up at each table because obviously for social distancing purposes, I have the counters separated, and then I go back and forth between the tables as I monitor. I know it seems like a juggling act, but it worked beautifully, and my counters were so great. Everybody has to wear PPEs. The audience has the opportunity to view what's going on, and the reason I have the laptops at the tables is for an extra measure. It's not required in any ways, but I found that it was very helpful because that laptop was showing what that counter was doing at that time. And the rest of the process is identical to what we usually do. You verify all the ballots, you go ahead and you check them against the roster of the unit owners, you look at the voting certificates, and we'll get into it about what things you should do and to prepare for this day that are critical in the success of an election. And then you proceed to opening your out envelopes, your inner envelopes, getting your ballots out, and tallying your ballots. So the process itself was great. I think, in all honesty, it took less time to do it via Zoom than when I have everybody in the room, talking, having to ask people to quiet down so that my counters can concentrate. It really worked very, very well. So now for those areas that can't have more than 10 people right now congregating in a room, it's doable and it works. It works. If you know how to run an election, it works.
Yeah, and I'm sure it does. But now with all the electronic voting, I mean, we've been making a push to try to push our clients. A lot of people have been hesitant, but I think now is the opportunity to really get people to get the buy-in. Could you give us a little bit of an idea, Alessandra or Carolina, on what an association needs to do? Like, what are the specifics? Because I know we've reached out to 2 or 3 companies, and I see Daniel has a question of what companies are there. There's multiple companies out there. We'll be happy to recommend a couple. However, some of them provide the information that needs to be approved. We strongly urge our clients to have it reviewed by the attorney, because obviously that would need to be approved at a board meeting. But if you could give us the specifics and the rundown of what your firm would be doing in order to implement the electronic voting process.
Right, so before I get to that, I just want to make a quick note about, you had asked about
Sure.
HOAs and electronic elections via Zoom, or just HOA elections via Zoom in general. And there's it's a little bit more difficult because the main difference between a condo election and an HOA election is most condo elections, you have to go through the 2-envelope process, or 99.9% of condominium elections, you have to do that. And
Correct.
it's very specific and statutory. With an HOA, it's based on their governing documents. And a lot of times for HOAs, the owners are allowed to vote by proxy. So there's that additional hoop that you have to go through to receive those proxies and to validate them in order to allow the voting. And then you also, unless the governing documents provide to the contrary, you have to allow nominations to be taken from the floor being Zoom. So it would be, I think it works in smaller associations. It would have to be very organized in order to work for a larger HOA to
Correct.
have a Zoom meeting, maybe request nominations in advance, but also allow nominations from the floor, or request that the proxies be submitted a little bit before the election so that you can verify and then determine which owner gets how many votes based on how many proxies they have. I mean, HOA elections are somewhat complicated to begin with without Zoom, so it can get a little hectic. And if someone's going to do that, I highly recommend that you work with management and your attorney to make sure that you follow all the procedures. And your question was, if you, Carolina.
So going into the electronic voting and what we recommend and what steps are to follow, I'll let Alessandra handle the steps, but kind of as a I guess a prelude to that, electronic voting is relatively new. So what you're going to see is tons of different companies trying to flood the market and offer their products. The issue is that there hasn't been much case law or challenge to electronic elections yet for us to gain a perspective. However, I can certainly tell you, based on my most recent experience, the things that I see that can certainly go wrong with electronic voting. So it is a great tool if it's properly implemented. And I'll let Alessandra go into the nitty-gritty of it.
Okay, so I'm trying to do this where I'm sharing my screen. Do you guys see my screen?
Yes, we do.
Okay,
Yep.
Awesome. Is it the electronic voting administrative code?
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Oh,
it is.
wonderful, it worked. Okay, so like Carolina said, because this is all new, there isn't that much on it, but one of the questions we got in advance that I see we're getting in the chat as well is there are all these companies out there that advertise that they do electronic voting. A lot of Texas companies, a lot of the Northeastern companies that did labor union votings online that are trying to get into the Florida market since Florida allowed for electronic voting. The problem is that a lot of them say they do electronic voting, but what we as attorneys do when we're asked to confirm is we'll talk with the provider and make sure that they comply with these electronic voting requirements, that their system is able to provide the unit owner the receipt of the vote. It has to specify the vote cast, the date and submission of the and user identification, that it produces an official records for the association to maintain, which identifies the votes cast on each ballot and the date and time of the receipt of the electronically submitted ballot. But this doesn't necessarily mean, because you still have to keep the secrecy of the election.
Correct.
So one of the big issues that we deal with is when you allow for electronic voting, it doesn't necessarily mean that someone can't vote by paper ballot. They just have the option to vote electronically. Now, the issue becomes when someone submits a paper ballot and also votes electronically, and which vote do you count and how do you determine which came in first? Because once a vote is cast for an election, it can't be taken away. It's not like a vote for an amendment where you have the option to change your vote. Once you cast a vote, it's the first one in for an election. So some providers cannot distinguish the time the electronic vote came in with the specific ballot in order to invalidate it. So what you would normally have to do is put in your notice that if there is a vote submitted by mail, then the association is going to immediately turn off your ability to vote electronically, right? So if you receive a paper ballot, so management has to be really involved in this process, right? Because wherever those ballots are coming upon receipt, we need to check, okay, wait, is there already an electronic vote? If there isn't, then you count that paper ballot. If there is, then that paper ballot is disqualified because that's a second vote for that specific unit, or lot. So you have to talk with your provider and make sure that you have a proper way to document when the ballots are coming in and how to handle a conflict in the event that you have that.
So another option that we had in a situation even involving an election monitor was the provider that was utilized for that particular association was able to print out a list of all the individuals who voted electronically. Okay, so before we even touched the paper ballots, we took the electronic ballots, and if any paper ballot was submitted, that paper ballot was disregarded. That's another option that was done. Obviously, that doesn't necessarily address which ballot was received first.
Correct.
But the consensus was that the electronic ballot would be the ballot that we would go, and any paper ballots would then be disregarded. So that was another way that it was handled. Again, none of this has been tested.
Of course, excellent. No, yeah, those are some excellent points. I know there's a local, I say in Florida, state of Florida company that does it, and they have solved that problem. They do provide you with the unit number and a timestamp of when it was received, so it makes it a little bit easier. A lot of times what we get is, boards get concerned that they're not going to receive the necessary participation. So as a tip, one of the things that you can do is, before just going straight into the electronic voting, most of the companies do provide surveys as part of the feature with the electronic voting. So right now, for instance, with this whole COVID, when to open the pool and so forth, you can do a simple survey. And that way you get people already opting in to receive this information electronically. And then you get a higher a ratio of individuals that will participate. Especially here in South Florida, where we have most buildings, they're anywhere between 30 to 50%, not rental, I'd say second homes or investment properties. It gives you really the opportunity to hear the voices of all, not just those that are living there. I mean, we have several properties in the Doral area that no one really, most of them don't live here, or they're here 6 months out of the year and so forth. So it's been a huge feature to be able to provide.
Rafael, one of the other concerns that we get a lot, and I've been asked to make pro and con lists of electronic voting, and it's great because it allows for participation, but at the same time, there's a lot of board members that are concerned about fraud with electronic voting, simply because, and I think it's more of a concern that can be solved, and it's an easy solution. It just requires a lot of the upfront work, as opposed to at an election, you do it all there. But when someone opts in, you need to check that the person opting into electronic voting is the person that's actually authorized to vote for the unit. So you need to make sure that that email that you're sending to the manager of that international owner that manages 3 or 4 of his units, he may be managing the unit that may be the contact that you have for him. And when he opts into electronic voting, he may not be the one authorized to vote. So when management is setting all this up with the vendor, they need to go through and determine what units need voting certificates, reach out to those units, and kind of get it all set up. And it's a lot of work in the beginning, but once you have that set up, I mean, the process becomes a lot easier. So you have to review the voting certificates and who's opting in, and make sure you keep those records. Yeah,
it's about, you're right, and those are excellent points, Alessandra. It's also about creating a system once you install electronic voting, because as you get new owners, it's making sure that you're obtaining the contact information for the owners, and then that way you can send the proper electronic voting requests to those individuals. I wanted to ask, with regards to board members that may have gotten COVID-19 and maybe have to get quarantined and whatnot. Have you heard of boards saying, well, you have to resign or anything like that? Have you had that experience at all? Or have you had that question from any of your clients?
I've had the unfortunate situation of a board member passing due to COVID, and the having to go ahead and reorganize and appoint a replacement board member. So this is something that could happen in our community, and it would be treated as a vacancy under the statutes and the bylaws as to how you appoint a replacement board member. And generally, the remaining members of the board of directors by majority vote appoint a replacement. But unfortunately, yes, it does happen, and I just had a recent association that went through it, and it's very difficult, and it's particularly difficult if the person that is affected had all of the information, especially if they're self-managed.
Yeah.
And now everybody that's left behind, there's no continuity type plan for the association. You know, that's really something to think about, not only in the situation of a COVID, but obviously with hurricane season. You want to have the ability to have a sense of continuity. So yeah, unfortunately, we have been impacted by this.
Wow, sorry to hear that. My prayers go out to that board member and their family. Yeah, we've seen the continuity is an important point, Caroline. I mean, you're seeing it. We've gotten a spike of calls from self-managed properties, especially, you know, during these kinds of times, because it's new for everyone. I think it's new for all of us here on this panel. It's been interesting, but fortunately enough, we have a strong network of partners that we can rely on, such as each other here in this group. So it is difficult for those self-managed properties. So hopefully they're on the call and getting the information that's needed to be able to, you know, point them in the right direction. So let's switch gears. Yeah, go ahead.
So just before we switch gears, because I want poor Vishnu hasn't had much of a
that's
chance
why I wanted to give him an opportunity.
I think it's a good segue. But from our perspective as association attorneys working with the managers, the most critical aspect of elections, whether it be electronic elections or regular elections, is preparation beforehand. Make sure that you have your voting certificates on file, that they're updated, have them in binders in order by unit number, and have your rosters updated, verify them and check them against the property appraiser's website. And now turning to what Vishnu is probably going to have a great perspective is check to see what your delinquencies are at least 60 days prior to your election, because that could affect the eligibility of certain members being eligible to come onto the board. And a lot of the times there could be a minor discrepancy or an accounting error by the association, and a unit owner may not even realize it. So you want to make sure that all that is taken care of before the election to make sure that no glitches happen. And now I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Rafael.
Sure, thank you. So Vishnu, I wanted to switch gears and give you an opportunity to chime in, because I know this is a big topic, especially now when you're talking about over, I think last time I checked was 40 million, you know, people without work, furloughs going on and so forth. What are the biggest issues you're seeing that are impacting associations' budgets at the moment?
Did we lose Vishnu?
Did we lose Vishnu?
There he is, I think.
Well, while Vishnu chimes back in, I'll go ahead and jump in and I'll give a management perspective. I know for us, you know, it's been, there we go. Yes, excellent.
Okay, good.
Did you get my question there, Vishnu?
Yeah, I did. Thanks. I could actually see you guys, but for whatever reason,
you know, for a second, I was wondering, that smile was like for a while.
It was very still.
I was like, wow.
Yeah, I seem to be freezing. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
But you're frozen with a smile, so it's all good.
Okay, good. I guess that works. As long as you can hear me, that's fine.
Yeah.
So, you know, the budgeting this year has been really, really crazy and very challenging. But I'll tell you the one thing, as much as we're seeing the COVID expenses come up, one of the big issues that we're actually seeing from associations is they're now seeing the impact of the hurricanes from 2 years ago. We have associations that are now facing 40% and higher insurance renewals. So
Yep.
we have an association that just did their renewal about a month ago. Their insurance went up $100,000.
Oh. Vishnu, I think we lost you.
So while Vishnu jumps back in, I can chime in there because our industries are very similar, so we feel sometimes the same pain points. So Vishnu was mentioning about insurance increases drastically going up. You want to chime in there, Vishnu? I think you're back
Yeah.
now.
No, thanks. So the insurance increases are dramatic from what we're seeing, and it's related to property and general liability to a certain extent. Flood, the national, FEMA's changed their program over the last couple of years, and you almost see a doubling every year as the federal government tries to collect more because it's such an underfunded program. So you're seeing dramatic increases. It's a smaller amount depending on the association. But the big number is property, and property is increasing 40% to 100%.
Yeah.
I have an association we were with last week, and they are looking at 100% increase, and it's an HOA in Tamarack, and they had 100% increase on their premium. I have an association that has a $1.2 million insurance premium each year. It's 3 buildings, 1,000 units. They looked at a $500,000 increase in their premium.
Wow.
Which was about 41% to their overall. So that's really the biggest number that we're seeing impacting a lot of associations that just didn't see it coming. If you saw a renewal in December, Raphael, you've probably seen the same thing, but December, January, it wasn't that material. All of a sudden, everybody who's now facing a renewal, May, June, July, just dramatic increases in that. As far as the COVID costs, those are costs that one of the things that I think most of our associations are doing is we're creating a separate budget line for it. It's just going to be an unbudgeted line and throw every expense that you have at that. One, it helps explain to all the owners what the nature of those expenses are and why they're going to be facing a makeup, because there's only certain ways you can cover those costs.
Of course.
Raphael, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, most definitely. With regards to the insurance increases, we have seen significant, and you're right, Vishnu, you hit it on the head. It has been over the past 2 months. We had a property on Ocean Drive that had such an increase that they went from a 3 to 5% deductible. It was a tough decision for them, but it was just the right decision just because of the cost. I mean, it's a smaller property, about 80 units. So it's been challenging for us. And when it comes to the COVID expenses, right now, most of the associations that we manage do still have their pools closed because they just can't meet the mandates that are out there for either of the counties. And I think most of the residents have been understanding. But overall, we're doing something similar, which is being able to separate any expenses that we have so that when the budget, which we're already kind of in budget season already, when it's happening, we can explain that to the residents, because all of a sudden when you see these variances, they're not really going to understand. And Vishnu, as with your clients, your 16,000 units, have you seen the boards really taking the approach of tapping into the reserves or passing any special assessments to be able to handle what's going on at the moment?
Yeah, so the way most of the associations are handling it, we actually have a couple of different methods that are being done. So we have a couple of associations that are actually passing a mid-year budget increase. So we have one actually that's doing it right now, and it'll take effect in July 1st. And sometimes it's 10-15% between the different associations we have right now that are taking this approach, and only because they can't wait, and they want to address it now because they figure that this increase, part of it's the insurance cost that they're trying to cover, which is going to carry into next year anyways. And then the COVID costs are a lesser evil that they're having to deal with. We have other associations that, because it's hurricane season, one of the things that bankers made a point to me and to some of the associations we deal with is, if you can, take a line of credit now. Just draw down on that. Don't draw on it necessarily if you don't need it, but take out that line of credit if it's $250,000. And if you're taking a line of credit just for the sake of needing it in case of an emergency, make it 2 months worth of your operating budget or 3 months worth of your operating budget. We always get, what's the metric you should use? Yeah. You want to figure that if you have a hurricane or something that comes up and it impacts you, you need to be able to cover that. If you don't get any payments from your owners for a month or two, can you survive?
Correct.
And that's what you really need to be able to have. And what you don't want to have to be doing is, you don't want to be stuck where that hurricane storm is approaching and now you're trying to go out and get that line of credit because you don't have cash. If you have cash in the operating, if you have a month or two worth of cash in the operating, if you have, a decent funded reserve, it doesn't have to be fully funded, but you have $500,000 in cash in your reserve or $1 million in cash in your reserve, then you're great. You don't need that line of credit. You can draw on your own cash that's available. But if you find yourself like a number of associations that have no reserve money set aside because you waive it every year, and you have less than 1 month worth of float, which is your operating budget worth of cash in your bank account, you definitely need to have something in place that when something happens, because forget COVID, it's hurricane season, baby. You got 6 months of this to go through, and we've had 2 storms or 3 storms now already hit the U.S. So we need to be prepared.
No, most definitely. And I want to throw the question back to Alessandra or Carolina. Obviously, in order to be able to tap the reserves, there's certain steps that must be taken. Can you outline that for our listeners today of what steps they would need to do, they would need to take, I should say, to be able to tap into the reserves?
Great. And the same applies, I was going to say, if you're going to take out a line of credit, you need to have an attorney review your documents to make sure that you can do that without requiring unit owner approval, because even though the line of credit would be in the event of an emergency, you don't have the right to take that line of credit when you're not in an emergency. So you may still need to vote pursuant to your governing documents. Now, if you're going to utilize reserve funds or special assessment funds for an alternate purpose that it wasn't intended for, you need to get the vote of the membership. And that's generally a majority after quorum. So that number is going to fluctuate based on your community, based on the people that show up to vote. And this is where electronic voting can be very helpful as well, in the event that you need to take this vote to reallocate funds. You can do it easily as a membership meeting on Zoom and utilize electronic voting. So it's not only for elections, but can also be used for if you're going to apply reserves for a different purpose, if you're going to utilize that special assessment. Maybe you were in the process of a big renovation project and now you're suffering because of COVID. So you've already collected some funds and you want to change the use of those funds. You can't do that without the membership approval. So you need to make sure that you go through those steps.
Excellent. And you know, now with the impacts, you know, of all the job losses, I'm still of the belief that the impact to our industry is going to take a little bit longer, just because, you know, there's unemployment checks that are still being issued in significant amount. People have their mortgages being furloughed. So if you haven't started preparing, you must start preparing immediately. Obviously, associations are nonprofit organizations, but Vishnu, I wanted to ask you, what kind of preparation do you think the board of directors should be taking to prepare for any potential delinquencies?
So, Rafael, your point is really well taken, because there is the moratorium on the foreclosures, which is helping. You have certain banks, everybody's paying attention to this right now. So this is the news cycle. But as we get out of this, there's still 20 million people unemployed.
Correct.
You know, as of last week. And that's not going to change anytime soon. Restaurants opening up at 50%, retailers opening up at 50%. Those numbers are not going to come back, and they're still predicting that by the end of the year we're still going to be double-digit unemployment, whether that's 10% or 15%, but it's still going to be a significant amount. So yeah, we're not seeing it right now because the unemployment checks are coming in, but whether Congress, you know, extends that out, you know, beyond the initial 12 or 20, whatever number of weeks it is right now, there's a debate, and the Senate right now doesn't want to even pick this back up until the middle of next month. To be able to discuss additional benefits. So we don't know what's going to happen. So payments are coming in. We're not seeing much, by the way, of increased receivables at this point. But what we have with the associations, we have most of the associations are taking it on a let me know if you have an issue and we will work with you approach. They are not automatically granting forbearances. They're not automatically doing anything because, as you said, Rafael, it's a condominium association. The only way you collect your money is from those payments from the owners. So if you can't collect those payments, something is not getting paid, or the association is going to have to go out and borrow money. Number one question, you know, Alessandra, we always get is, no, you cannot borrow from your reserve fund. There is no such thing as borrowing from your reserve fund.
Yeah. And the other thing I was going to mention was that, you know, I just lost my train of thought. Hold on. No, because we were talking. Wait, Vishnu, you mentioned something, and it raised a really important point in regards to delinquencies and how to handle it, and
with regards to payment plans and so forth.
So we've taken the position that we encourage that collections and your policy on collections be firmed up. 6 weeks ago. So it's kind of like hurricane preparedness. You should have your collection policy in place. And we believe that you should try to be very aggressive on your collection procedures. Even though there's a moratorium on foreclosures, even though the courts are not issuing writs of possession or evictions at this moment, that doesn't stop the association from initiating its collection efforts. That doesn't stop the association from sending the initial demand letter, the intent to lien letter, and filing the claim of lien to be ready at that point in time where you do have to proceed with foreclosure. Nobody wants to foreclose on a unit. Nobody wants to send unit owners who are struggling into collections. But the fact of the matter is that the water bill for the association still needs to be paid. The vendors still need to be paid. The managers still need to be paid. So the association has an obligation to meet its financial obligations just as much as the unit owners do. And we found, based on the last economic downturn or economic debacle, that associations that were aggressive and had a policy, an established policy and procedure in place for their collections fared much better during that time of economic downturn, and now are in a very strong financial position than those associations that allowed their collections to get out of control. So that's really important to keep in mind right now.
Yeah, I remember what I was going to say, which Carolina, you sort of hit the point, is that even though your pool may be closed, you still need to have that pool service so it doesn't turn green, right? Correct. Even though you may not be using that grassy area, the lawn still needs to be mowed. So there are still operating expenses even when the amenities are closed, and therefore you need to keep collecting assessments so that you can function. Because, and I say this a lot on webinars, and I feel like it's going to become like our quote, but if it's anything that you take from this, is that at the end of the day, the association is a business, and we've done webinars, I think with Vishnu a few years ago, about running your association as a business. And you know, you still have to have a budget, and you still have to make a profit. Even though you're not for profit, you still have to collect the assessments so that you can pay your vendors. So it's still a business, and you still have to act in the best interest of the association as a board member, and even though we're concerned about the homeowners, and we understand because everyone is in different circumstances right now, and these are unprecedented, fluid times, we still have to, if you're a board member, you need to look out for the best interests of the association as a whole, and being able to operate through the next few months and make your decisions based on that.
Well, Alessandra, sorry, Raphael, it's just, the bottom line comes down to, it's one thing to have that sympathy for the owner who can't make the payment and try to work out a payment plan with them. But the reality is, when they don't make that payment, every single other owner gets the additional burden now, because they have to make up that operating shortfall. And whether that comes in an increased budget now because you have to collect for that shortfall, or it's a special assessment, or a loan to recover those funds, at some point, every other owner is going to bear that. So the board has to keep that in mind, as much as you want to be sympathetic, I think, for individual owners who are going through very hard times, and you want to work out payment plans with them, but you have to make sure that you're protecting all of the owners, because that burden falls on everybody else.
Correct. And you have to apply those, and you have to apply whatever you're doing, you have to apply it across the board. I mean, we had we basically, our boards gave just shy of about 3 months. We had a big discussion with most of our clients this month on getting back on late fee and interest charges. And all board members have agreed that in July, they're going to bring them back on. We've had the question as well, Spotify, this company's giving 4 or 5 months of no payments. What can we do as an association? The answer is pretty simple. If we waive 3 months of fees, we're basically going to have to tack it on later on. I mean, you're still going to end up paying for it one way or another, where it's a zero-sum game in the association business. So it's not like you have excess funds. And to your point that you mentioned earlier, Vishnu, of having 2 to 3 months in your accounts, most associations struggle to do that. So imagine having to wait 2 or 3 months; they'd be wiped out, fairly quickly. So as board members, you have to really take a look. We have to be compassionate with the residents, but at the end of the day, as everyone has mentioned, we're running a business, and we have to continue running that business for the better of all, right? Vishnu, is there anything that you're doing with your clients at the moment to prepare for a potential major impact to their accounts?
So if we go back to the concept of borrowing and loans, so there are two things you can really do at this particular point. You can either realize that the impact, and you're assessing every single month, you should be getting financial statements from your accounting firm or your management company, and you should be going through those. One of the exercises that every board should be doing at the end of the month: how much cash do I have in the bank? Subtract from that how much is prepaid maintenance, right? So if I have $100,000, my monthly budget is $100,000, but prepaid maintenance, meaning the amount of money I've already collected for next month's maintenance, is $50,000, then that means I have $50,000. I have half a month worth of cash available to me. And that's an important number to understand, because Rafael, as we're talking about, if you're looking, you should be in association with 1 to 2 months worth of free cash flow that's available to you at all times. And if you're not, you're getting a line of credit. People have looked out for this PPP money and the EIDL, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, both programs by the SBA, as being some miracle cure for them. And unfortunately, PPP, the general consensus is that it doesn't apply to condominium and homeowner associations. When it was passed, it was for small businesses, and there were some carve-outs for not-for-profits, but the not-for-profits it was carved out was for 501c3s, which are true charitable organizations, C19, which was a Veterans Affairs groups. It doesn't apply. Now, does that mean that you didn't hear the stories of an association applying? Well, we'll leave it up to them and how they applied. It's a 2-page application. You have to go through a particular bank. And if a particular bank came up with an application, they were willing to apply, and and nothing more can be said. It's just, there are a couple that we saw go through, and whether that money ever gets given back or not, we obviously, everybody saw the Fisher Island debacle where, I think they applied, they got it, it was all over the news. And then, as soon as the owners found out, they immediately rejected it. The EIDL loan, which now seems to be coming around, where I'm having a lot of associations asking about the EIDL. The reality is your bank will give you far better terms than the EIDL. The Economic Injury Disaster through the SBA, you have to apply directly to the SBA. The PPP, at least, what you went through the bank, and it was a lot more streamlined and simplified. The EIDL is a significant process. You have to apply directly through the SBA. And right now, we had an association that reached out earlier this week. The SBA said the EIDL loans are now only available to agricultural entities. So they are not giving it to any other entity right now. There's only X amount of funds left in it, and it's being earmarked for that. So there is nothing available on that regard. As far as budget planning goes, it's really just looking at where you're at right now, what's your cash flow, and the regular budget process should be starting in about 2 months anyways. You should be starting, if you have a calendar year, January to December, you should be starting your budget process as soon as you get your July financials. In August, you should be able to start looking at that, getting your contract numbers together, the best case guess from your insurance broker as to what he's telling you that number is going to be. And then you're looking at what your experience has been for what you need to recover. There's going to be a lot of associations that better be looking to put in a line in next year's budget to recover the loss that you're going to have from this year. Too many associations do not do that. They simply roll over the budget for next year, and they don't recover the money needed for this year.
Correct. I think we're going to start seeing, Vishnu, like we did 7 or 8 years ago, a strong bad debt line item that over the years has dwindled down, obviously because things have gotten better, but now we're going to start seeing it. If not, you should already start planning to put it into your budgets to have that cushion, because when it comes, it's going to come, and if you're not prepared, it's going to blindside you and your associations, because most of them just don't have the capital readily available. So we're getting close.
There's a question.
Sure.
Oh, sorry. There's a question from one of our viewers about engaging an auditor to prepare the annual financials and not doing that on a timely basis. The Dbpr had suspended these and extended the deadlines for financial reporting. Those have now been put back in place as far as we know. I don't know to what extent they're enforcing them, but can you talk a little bit about the audits and the deadlines that were extended for financial reporting?
Sure. So through our work, the Florida Institute of CPAs, the CIRA committee, we reached out at the beginning of this back in March. The committee reached out directly to the division and the secretary of the Dbpr and requested clarification regarding the deadline of April 30th. It's 120 days after the end of the fiscal year, as we all know. We were able to get that. And I'm going to be real specific on the terming because I've heard attorneys use the word tolling. And unfortunately, what ended up happening is they said, sure, we're gonna put a moratorium on this and we're not going to do anything. And the order was issued, as everybody knows, and it just froze everything. Well, I think the expectation was everybody had that at some point they're going to go ahead and say, okay, we're going to now turn this back on and you're going to have X period of time. Unfortunately, what happened was we got notice through the committee about 2 weeks ago that they were just going to turn it, they just decided June 1st, that's it. And they were going to go ahead and turn it back on. And now immediately everything had to be done by June 1st. It wasn't that June 1st comes and there's a tolling period and we're going to take the 45 days or whatever it's been and add it onto it. It's now going to be the middle of July, which is what a number of attorneys that I spoke to was interpreting it to be that way. We actually asked, because through our representative on the committee, I asked the question. I said, can we please ask that question? Because the attorneys are telling me that. The secretary wrote back and basically said, no, it's June 1st is what that's going to be. So our understanding is that. However, what we were also told is that they are going to, the division is going to enforce with a certain amount of leniency, looking at the reasons why it was. So obviously, as we know, any number of CPA practices are remote. There's nobody actually working in an office, and you're trying to do everything and communicate with management companies that may or may not have been in place at the time. I have associations in Miami-Dade where the board is all over wherever they were at, and the management itself was working remotely for 4 weeks or 6 weeks during this. So getting documents was very, very difficult. So my understanding is the division's willing to be lenient and understanding, but you're going to have to still address it. It's not going to be, if somebody makes a complaint that the financials are not there, they're going to react to it. And there's going to have to be something that's presented to them as the reasons why.
Excellent. I have a question here for you, Vishnu. When you brought up from Stephen, you mentioned about the COVID line item, which was actually a great point. He wants to know what are you putting into that budget line item for COVID? Is everything, what in particular are you recommending to your clients to put in that line item?
So what we're recommending is create a line, you know, accounting for associations are pretty straightforward in that you've got 4 or 5 sections: administrative, contract, repair and maintenance, insurance, etc. So we're recommending a line either under administrative or repair and maintenance. We prefer administrative. And then you have, and it specifically should be coded COVID-19 related expenses. So, and then it's a catch-all. Anything related to that's an actual cost where you're incurring it. I would not be reallocating payroll and saying that, you know what, Bob worked 60 hours this week and part of that's overtime, so we're going to do a journal entry to move that expense over. I wouldn't be playing those games because now you're micromanaging that process. I would be looking at hard costs. You have to have the hazmat guys in. You had to have all these additional cleaning supplies that are specifically related to this. Any new signage policy, things like that that you had to do, all the extra equipment step materials that you needed, or professional services that were related to this, put that in one line that's cleanly identified. And then, you know, the rest of it, I think you can identify when budgeting comes up.
All right, excellent. So we're getting close to the end of the webinar. I wanted to ask each of you if there's any last minute points that you want to mention for our audience to consider with budgets or election. And I'll start with you, Carolina.
Be prepared. So do your preparation ahead of time. I think that's the most important thing that I can recommend. You don't have to hire an election monitor unless you obviously want to. There are so many qualified election monitors, or you could work with your attorney, or if you receive the petition to appoint someone through the ombudsman, you can do that as well. But key is working with your management, making sure that you have all the prerequisites to having a successful election.
Thank you, Carolina. And Alessandra?
Just utilize your professionals. At the end of the day, you know, we're trying to stay on top of all the orders, all the changes, all the legislative changes and everything. And it's a lot for a board member who is a volunteer to be doing what they normally do with their lives and then do, take on this additional responsibility of everything that's going on. So again, rely on a good management company and a good accountant and a good attorney to assist you guys through this process, because it's better to spend the time and do it right and utilize the professionals now rather than deal with complaints after. And then I just want to mention quickly, I know that Josh mentioned to me over text, apparently Zoom is crashing, which would explain. So if any of you guys have had troubles getting kicked out and getting back in, it's not us. I think, Vishnu, that might have had something to do with your issue.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's apparently he's getting bombarded with calls. Zoom has been having tons of issues today. So it's not us and it's not you guys. It's Zoom, and sometimes we can't do anything about it. But thank you guys for being patient and for attending.
Thank you. Vishnu, any closing remarks?
Sure, just two things. One, as I've done on a couple of these so far, just a shout out to managers. You guys are amazing. You're heroes through this entire process. All of my managers out there that I deal with personally, and then all of them that are out there in Southeast Florida and across the state. You've been thrown things. I have managers who've had, as Carolina said, I have managers who've had members of the community pass away from this, and you're learning. You're having a hazmat crew come in. You're having to figure out and make protocols and policies for things that nobody's ever had to deal with in 100 years. And it's just astounding, and you're rolling with it and you're coming through it in amazing fashion. So just a shout out to all the managers out there. Rafael, your team, just a great job. And then just, to all the boards out there and even the managers. The managers do it well, but the boards, be responsible when it comes to budgeting. I understand that nobody wants an increase ever, but the reality is you cannot put yourself in a position where you have significantly increasing costs. You have increased costs for this year, and you bury it, next year by saying, you know what, we're going to keep the budget flat, and repair and maintenance is just going to get cut down to, a smaller number so that our budget maintenance can stay the same. And then next year comes and you have no money to carry over, and then you're using next month's money to pay this month's bills. Nobody needs to be in that position. So be responsible, take it, what it needs to be, and, pass a fair budget that actually is going to cover your expenses and cover any losses you incur this year.
Well said, Vishnu. I first wanted to start off by thanking Joshua and Ashley for helping put all this together. I know that behind the scenes, they do all the work. We're the ones that just look pretty on screen, right? So I wanted to thank them for all that. I wanted to thank you as well, Vishnu, for being part of this today. The dynamic duo here, like Carolina and Alessandra, I know you two are always working together. So I wanted to thank you. And I do want to add to what Vishnu said. I want to thank my team, all the managers, all the janitorial maintenance individuals that are out there. If it wasn't for you, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. And more importantly, to the board members, to make sure as you're having compassion for your residents, make sure that you're having compassion and understanding for yourself, that we're all going through this together. It hasn't been easy. But if you continue to attend webinars such as these and get yourself a stronger understanding of what's going on, it should make your life much easier. And make sure to lean on the partners that help you get through these kinds of situations. So with that, I want to thank you all for being here today, and I hope you gained some additional knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you.